somebody who was invested in Cold War mania, is no longer in office. That's Joe Biden. And look at what President Lula of Brazil just said about Joe Biden. He said that Biden told him that Russia needed to be destroyed. That's according to Lula, that Biden believed, and Lula's based this on his conversation with Biden, with Biden, that Russia needed to be destroyed. And that's also the agenda that Dick Cheney had. Robert Gates in his memoir recalls talking with Dick Cheney about how Dick Cheney also said that Russia needed to be destroyed. This is back in the early 1990s. So that's been the bipartisan consensus in Washington that's driven this policy, that Russia needs to be destroyed. But Trump's not on board with it. And when he's not on board with it, that means Ukraine is going to be left to fight this now largely without the U.S. support that it's counted on for the last many years. And maybe Europe will try to make it up. And if Europe can come up with the money to buy U.S. weapons, then I'm sure Trump will be happy to sell to them. But absent that, this is not the same proxy war that we've seen in the years up to this point.
And I think that was obvious to anyone who was paying attention that Biden wanted to destroy Russia. What does it mean to destroy Russia? I mean, that's what the whole Maidan coup is about. It was about bringing Russia into a pressure cooker effect, balkanizing Russia, forcing it to spend enormous amounts of its GDP on defending itself in its near abroad, and then putting pressure on Putin to repress a restive public. And the policy failed under Biden, but I think it remains the de facto policy of the Trump administration. And Trump is going to let them fight it out, sitting next to Friedrich Merz, who's just authorized tourist strikes into Russia. I mean, Trump has really done very little to counteract all of these neocon elements within his own camp, from Lindsey Graham. Senator Mark Kelly was in Ukraine right before Graham and Blumenthal. And then the Europeans got Trump a week after he humiliated Zelensky and said Zelensky had no cards. The Europeans applied pressure of their own to get Trump to restore intelligence cooperation with Ukraine, as well as to restore arms shipments to the Ukrainian military. So what did he expect here on the eve of Istanbul? And the press, the press is not only, the Beltway press corps has not only been pushing Trump to apply more sanctions to Russia, daring him, shouting at him in the Rose Garden press conferences to impose more sanctions as if it's going to have any effect, but they've been serving as the PR machine for Ukraine's military, which is behaving more like an insurgency than an actual military in a trench war. And this is the New York Times with part of the narrative about the magical Ukrainians. Ukraine shows how it can still flip the script on how wars are waged. This is such a annoying 40-something Gen Xer headline. Can you imagine the New York Times 30 years ago saying flip the script, when that was a phrase that was mainly familiar to fans of backpacker hip hop? I don't think so. But what they're doing is they're making it seem as though the magical Ukrainians came up with this completely on their own. They have no foreign backers training them, and that we should just give them more weapons, and that Trump is insane to attempt to end this war when Ukraine is flipping the script and jumping off the porch on the Russians. The reality is it was an MI6 operation. We've exposed the blueprints. Everybody knows it was an MI6 operation, which raises a lot of questions. Did Trump know? I bet the CIA director, Ratcliffe, knew. I don't know if Tulsi Gabbard knew. Did Trump know this was coming? It was supposedly planned for 18 months. Under Sunak, it would have had to have been initially authorized. And it wasn't just attacking strategic bombers. It was a terror attack on Russian railways. We've exposed the blueprints, the Project Alchemy blueprints for attacking Russian railways. A 7-month-old baby had to be medevaced from Bryansk to Moscow to survive that attack. Over 100 were injured. The Kerch Bridge was attacked before, and it may have been attacked again with limpet mines. Remember the first time that Kerch Bridge was attacked, that was when Russia started attacking the energy infrastructure of Ukraine. And the goal here is not just to keep Ukraine fighting. As I said, it's to peel Russia off from its allies in the global south by getting them to attack civilian infrastructure again in Ukraine. And here's another point that I don't think has been reinforced enough, which is that under the 2010 START missile treaty between the US and Russia, all strategic bombers have to be out in the open so they can be photographed by satellites. So the other side knows, oh, a strategic bomber's missing. Are they coming to wage a surprise nuclear attack on us? And so this is widely acknowledged as having exposed Russia to this Ukrainian drone attack. I mean, this is, one headline out of many. START missile treaty exposed Russia's nuclear bombers to Ukrainian drone attack. Finally, the neocons like the START treaty that they've been trying to shred. Who didn't sign on to the START treaty? London, the UK. They're not involved in it. So they themselves don't have strategic bombers exposed to a potential Russian counterattack.
I think it's quite plausible, as you said, to suspect MI6, given that they have had a hand in pretty much every covert Ukrainian operation. And yeah, if the CIA wasn't involved, that would be a first, because as the New York Times recently confirmed, the U.S. was basically running the war from a military base in Germany. I'd be surprised, though, if Trump knew about this. It doesn't strike me that his heart is in this proxy war. And for people whose heart is in the proxy war, I doubt they'd want Trump to know about it. But if U.S. intelligence didn't know about that this was happening, then that's a failure on their part, because they know about pretty much everything else. But look, this also is, Putin also has responsibility here too. I mean, he's chosen to make some maximalist demands that go beyond what he was willing to settle for before. He's increased his demands. Ukraine and the U.S. said no. And so it's him also that is prolonging the war too. Like, he's demanding more regions than he initially sought back in 2022. In fact, in 2020, he didn't seek any regions. He just wanted to have basically Ukraine declare neutrality. That was his main demand. But, because of the pressures he's under domestically, he's increased his demands. And so every side now is incentivized basically to continue fighting. So the bottom line is, we thought maybe this war could end soon if Trump put enough effort behind it. He's not going to, clearly. And so I think we're looking at a war going on for a lot longer than most people thought, and certainly everybody hoped for.
Trump always gets rolled. And every front diplomatically, Trump is failing. And he leans in harder on all diplomatic fronts than Biden did on Iran. Biden basically wanted the status quo that Trump established with maximum pressure, and avoided any direct negotiations or even real indirect negotiations with the Iranians in Gaza. Look at what just happened. The UN, Dorothy Shea, Trump's UN interim ambassador, vetoed another ceasefire resolution. I think it's the sixth one. Steve Witkoff is acting like Israel's lawyer, as we discussed last week. And if you go back through our live streams, going back to like late 2023, what we've been saying consistently on Ukraine is the longer the war goes on, the worse Zelensky's negotiating position will be, and the less territory he will have to negotiate over. So if this had been resolved at Istanbul in April 2022, Ukraine would have come out with much more territory than it will come out with at the end of this. That's pretty obvious. But if you also go back to that time and look what mainstream media was saying, look at what the think tank lanyards on K Street were saying, look at what almost all of Congress was saying, and Joe Biden himself, it was that Ukraine was on a path to victory. The Europeans were saying it too, and they're continuing to fuel Zelensky's delusions of victory, to the point where Zelensky now says, our goal is not a cessation of hostilities, it's total victory.